Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast Next Steps in Talent Management Part 3, Modern Succession Planning, a Growing Business Need, sponsored by Cultivate Consulting and presented by Rebecca Murray. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI credit and can also be used for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. After the webcast, you will receive an email from HR.com within 1 to 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information, and you can also log into HR.com and go to your View My Credits page where you can see the credits you have received. If you have any questions today for our presenter or for HR.com, please type them into the Questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel and we will follow up with you. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to our presenter, Rebecca Murray.
Hester, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Today we are covering part 3 of our talent management series. Today's topic is modern succession planning. Say that one 10 times fast. Why it's important for your organization and some things that you can be doing to gear up. And some things that you may try doing a little bit differently if you're already running succession planning exercises. So here's today's agenda. We'll start with introductions. We'll talk a little bit about where the workforce is today and why succession planning is more important now than ever. And then we'll talk about how succession planning can have an impact on today's workforce, preparing your organization for the changes that we see coming. We'll go into how do you find your key positions. That's the question everyone always asks. How do you know which position is key or not? We'll talk about ways that you can mitigate risks of vacancies in those key positions. Just some things that you can do to get your employees and colleagues up and ready and developed and in the waiting wings, if you will, for those key positions. We'll summarize with some best practice recommendations, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. With that being said, my name is Rebecca Murray. I am based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I am an HCM consultant. I help organizations near and far work through their business processes in terms of human resources, come up with some optimal ways for doing things, automate with technology wherever possible, and really just help alleviate the day-to-day burdens of some of the transactional pieces of HR, coupled with adding in some strategic functionality, which can be of a big assistance to HR employees out there. So that's a little bit about me. I've been doing this for a little over a dozen years, and I very much enjoy doing it and working with colleagues within the HR space. My company, Cultivate, is a member of the Illumity Group. We cover all of North America and parts of Europe. And my group specializes just in HR, but the Illumity Group as a whole focuses on managing all of your data needs through enterprise resource software solutions. So whether it's a CRM or materials management or finance systems coupled with your HR solution, we are able to meet your business needs there. All right, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about today's current workforce and how some things maybe are a little bit different than what we have seen in the past. And this will kind of lay a little bit of foundation for us as to why succession planning is so important nowadays. And so first up, I think those of us who have been in the workspace for 5, 10 years, within the past 2 to 3 years, we've probably seen a lot of changes. Rapid changes. And if you can go back over 5 or 7 years, you probably are seeing that things are being done a little bit differently now, and that employees' expectations as to the relationship with their employer are a little bit higher. They want a little bit more out of their work engagement. And so we are seeing some of these changes come into the workforce. You'll probably start to see them if you haven't yet. One of the things that's kind of leading that change is that right now we have, believe it or not, 5 generations of employees working side by side. So different generations typically have different ways of doing business, different ways of communicating, different expectations when it comes to the length of their employment at an organization, things like that. So we're starting to see a little bit of a shift as two of our newest generations are starting to come on board. Our two older generations are preparing for retirement if they haven't retired already. So that's likely to leave us with some vacancies in what we would term to be key positions. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, there's a good bet that someone who has been working for the better part of their life has quite a bit of knowledge and experience, and that is about to be going out the door as those people retire. They may also be in some key leadership positions, and we're starting to see vacancies pop up there. Another thing that's coming into play with our two newer generations joining the workforce, they are not as committed to staying with organizations as our employees of the past. So we are seeing them hop jobs every 2 to 4 years, looking for new opportunity, for career advancement and growth. In fact, the average amount of time that a millennial is staying with a current job these days is 3 years and 4 months. And previously we were seeing spans of 5 to 7 years with the previous generation, and then older generations making more of a career commitment to an organization. And on top of all of that, there happens to be this strong competitive market for talent. So there's just a shortage of skilled workers in some areas, both functionally and geographically based. And because people are retiring or moving about, there is, a little bit of a competition to get some good people in the door, and then to keep them in the door, to have them stay within the organization. So I did a little map out of the 5 different generations: traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, and even Generation Z that's starting to come on board. We're starting to see that people are out of the traditionalist and into the baby boomer segments are starting to retire if they haven't already. And then, of course, from the Generation Y and the Generation Z, we're starting to see a lot of movement from job to job, what I like to call job hopping. So then really, and I went ahead and just drew X's over the groups and squiggly lines out of the people who are hopping around. Really what we're looking at for our base of employees, where we're expecting a little bit of stability, about half of our baby boomer segment, and then our Generation X segment. So we're starting to be left with gaps on either end with our entry level and junior level workforce. We're starting to see those people move around, and some of our more senior level employees, possibly in management, we're starting to see them leave. And it used to be that when we had a vacancy, especially in one of those top leadership type roles, that we could either promote someone from within or grab someone from a competitor. But what we're starting to see, because it's this kind of generation and a half that's retiring, the people below those folks in leadership positions are retiring as well. So that's creating a gap. And then if we go over to our competition or to our neighbor to try to grab someone there, they're facing the same problem, that their leaders are retiring and the level below their leaders are retiring as well. So what can we do to kind of, overcome that? What are some things that we can put in place at our organization to work to counterbalance that? And for me, succession planning is just absolutely key. This graphic that I have up for you here is from the Pew Research Group, and basically what they have done, they have started mapping the changing workforce composition by generation, and you can see, as expected, the number of silents, which are traditionalists, and our boomers are starting to go down as those individuals are retiring, and our number of millennials starting to go up. So right now, over 30% of the workforce is composed of individuals from that millennial generation. And of course, there are employees who tend to job hop the most. All right, one thing that we want to make sure that we're doing is preventing shortages or gaps in our key positions. We don't want to not have enough people to perform a certain task. We don't want to not have the right people performing those certain tasks. We don't want to be left with a gap in a leadership role or in kind of a linchpin role that's maybe holding multiple segments together. And so organizations really need to kind of step up what they've been doing in the past when it comes to succession planning. And one of the things I like to tell people that I work with is that you need to think a little bit outside of your traditional succession planning box. And that may mean you have to dig a little bit deeper down into your organization. It may mean that you also need to think outside of your organization to some external person to pull them into your scenarios as well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this actually brings us to our first poll question of today's session. And that question is, are you starting to see a more competitive environment for top talent? I think Hester is going to open up the poll so that we can all record our responses. So go ahead and take a moment, record your response, and then we'll share those numbers out with the group. Okay, Hester, I think we can go ahead and close the poll, and if you wouldn't mind reading out the results, that would be wonderful.
So 93% of the people said yes to, are you starting to see a more competitive environment for top talent? And 7% said no.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So obviously, overwhelming majority are starting to see that competitive environment right at their own organization. So we know for right now we must be on the right track, that if everyone's seeing that competition, we can only assume that it's going to remain that way, at least for a little while. And so, it's up to us to take some steps to try to give ourselves a leg up on that competition. And one of the things that we can do is utilize succession planning if we aren't currently doing so, or maybe revamp our succession planning if we're doing it currently. So just a little foundational setting. I'm sure most of you on the phone have a good idea about what exactly succession planning is. But just for those of you who are maybe hearing the term for the first time or, seeing a presentation about it, succession planning is a process. And I say process intentionally because it's something that really should be ongoing. It's not a one-time event, if you will. But during this process, we try to identify what we call key positions or critical positions. They are roles within our organization that if they were to become vacant and not have someone working or performing in that role, there would be a significant deficit or impact to our business. Whether that means we're without leadership in a certain area, or we're without a particular skill or qualification or certification, and unable to continue processing in some aspect or regard. It's just something that is completely integral to the work that we're doing. And so what we want to do during succession planning is identify those key positions and then identify people who could step up and assume that role should the incumbent holder of that position leave our organization. And sometimes we know if people are leaving, they've scheduled a retirement and we have a big party. Sometimes people, transfer out to another organization or take another role within our group or leave us unexpectedly. And we don't want to be caught in a scenario where we don't have someone primed and ready to take over that key role, because we don't want our business to suffer. So key positions may include leadership roles. Probably many of your leadership roles would be considered key positions. But when you're going through and doing your exercises, it's very important not just to focus on the top of your organization. For two reasons. One, most people focus on the top of the organization. So it's very likely that your executives, for example, already have some sort of idea as to, what areas they could manage if they needed to in a bind, or who they would pull in for a replacement if needed. They're also more likely to stay in that role If they are going to leave it, there's more of a and they're more likely to give you advance notice of that change of leadership. So you'll have time to do something there. So don't only focus at the top, because you'll find that at every level of your organization, there are at least a handful of key positions, even at the bottom. Even some of those sales positions or operational positions, are essential for the operation of the company. So don't forget to check not just the top of your organization, but the middle and the bottom as well. Okay, that brings us to poll number 2 for today. Do you have a formal succession planning process? So Hester, if you'll open up poll number 2 for us, I would appreciate it. And everyone can take a moment or two to record your response, and then we'll see how the group is doing as a whole. Okay, Hester, do you have poll 2 results for us? Okay, let's go ahead and continue then. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that many of you do have succession planning scenarios, at least in some informal capacity, if not formal. So let's go ahead and talk exactly what succession planning is and how to go about doing succession planning. One thing that you should take into account is the concept of multiple successors. So that if you have a key position, you don't want to have just one person identified as a successor. Where possible, you want to have multiple people identified as successors, ideally ranked by some sort of readiness indicator, so that you have a listing of people who are ready now, ready in 1 year, and ready in the long term, 3 years out, 5 years out. And that allows you to have backup as people are job hopping from job to job, or in case they end up retiring or being pulled into another position within your organization. So just giving you a sense of backup during this particular planning process. And it's important to indicate what someone's level of readiness is. If they're not ready now, it doesn't mean that you rule them out as a successor. It just means that you go on to step 2 and put together development plans to help get them ready. And it may not be something that happens immediately. You may need to have a plan in place that, provides extra training, perhaps provides an advanced degree, sends someone to leadership seminars, or gets them certified with a certain type of certification. And so developing that plan will help increase the readiness level of those successors on your planning list. Point 3 to note on this screen is that your succession plan should also include multiple levels of movement. And what I mean by that is, if we have a successor identified, what happens to his or her position when we move them out of that position and into an additional position? So do we have backups prepared for our intended moves? Especially as we get up into the organizational structure, into the management and leadership roles, it is likely that many levels of those direct reports are key positions themselves. So you want to make sure that you are planning multiple levels down so that you can account for movements. My little tagline that I have there is, don't fill one gap by creating another. As you're going through your succession planning exercise, work multiple levels down. So here are some tips at the bottom for bringing your succession planning up to speed if you're doing something now but maybe it's not quite working for you. It used to be that organizations did succession planning once a year. And that's still a great initiative to get together once a year, perhaps with your leadership team, with HR, with strategic folks in the organization. But it really needs to be an ongoing process because people are moving around your organization. we're seeing significant number of retirements and significant number of movements out of the organization. And that is only going to continue over the next few years. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your succession plan up to date with the movements of people. You also should consider looking not just internally for successors, but potentially externally as well, especially if there are some skills or competencies that are extremely rare or hard to find. And one thing that customers of mine are starting to do, if they are using a recruiting system or an ATS that allows them to create and maintain talent pools, a lot of people are actually using external candidates from their talent pools in their potential succession plans. Therefore identifying people that they could possibly tap down the road if they needed to. The other point I have here under modern tips, this one is received well by 50% of my customers and not received well by the other 50%. But for a lot of groups, succession plans are top secret and they're hush-hush and nobody knows about them. So if you're tapped to be a successor, you might not know. And the danger with this is, as more and more of our younger generations begin to work their way into our organization and up our organization, we already know that they're job hopping, looking for the next big opportunity. Well, if we have them planned to have an opportunity at our organization and we never tell them, then that might open the window for them to look elsewhere and take a role elsewhere. So consider, in some cases, informing people that they are part of a succession plan, that there is room for growth and development at your organization for them. Because as we've seen, people are looking elsewhere if they're not getting opportunities within the organization. All right, so steps of succession planning. Most people talk about 4 or 5 steps. I actually have a step 0 in my plan. I think it's the thing that should be done first and is oftentimes overlooked. And that is to review the future plans of your organization. So it doesn't make sense to go through and identify a key position in a full succession scenario for a key position that will not be a key position in 6 months because the nature of your business is adjusting or moving in a different direction. Or there could be someone in your organization who's in a position that when they leave, you may choose to not replace. Either that position will be, merged with another one or somehow aligned into a different group. So make sure that whatever it is you're doing and planning for, that it aligns with the vision of your organization down the road. That's essential, and most people kind of skip over that particular piece. Step 1, and this is oftentimes the hardest, is to identify key or critical positions. To actually go in and say, okay, what are the ones that we should be planning for? How do we know if it's key? How do we know if we should plan for it or not? We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section. But you would be surprised at what is essential for the organization versus what is not essential for the organization. And as a preview for the next chapter, it's not always the leadership roles. And to be honest, it's not always even executive roles. Step 2 is to analyze the skills and competencies required for each position. So now that we know what our key positions are, we have to go and identify what a holder of that position needs to have in order to be successful there. If we're trying to plan a successor or recruit someone for a vacancy, we need to know specifically the skills and qualifications required for that particular position. Step 3 is actually find the people. Sort through your organization, check people's qualifications, skills, and competencies, and identify who should be the successors for these particular key positions. And go ahead and actually document them out. Write them down, assign them a level or a ranking or a rating, and possibly identify any deficiencies that they may have. It's possible that you won't find someone who is 100% qualified to take over a particular key position. But if they're mostly qualified and you can identify what the deficiencies are, then you can go on down to step 4 and create a development plan for that employee to help bridge any gaps. And in an ideal world, you have kind of coupled their readiness ranking with their development plan. So by the time they finish their development plan, they are 100% ready for that particular role. Do these things always work out 100% perfectly? No, of course not. But you do the best you can, and you prepare people the best that you can, so that if there is a vacancy, expected or unexpected, you're able to fill it with the best person for that role. And then step 5 is make sure that you're constantly updating this plan. Here it says just specifically account for employee moves and terminations. You don't want to have a plan that's full of people who are no longer at your organization. But the other thing that it should read here is make sure you're constantly updating your key positions. Because as you are flooded with people of one particular skill type, it may no longer become a key position or a key skill. Or if people start to leave that had that particular skill, you may find that it's more and more of a rare quality to be able to replace. So your key positions will adjust as well. A tip to kind of add a little something to your existing succession plan, don't be afraid to talk to the employees in your organization and ask them what it is they're interested in. I know it seems like a simple step, but you know, how do we know if someone's interested in something or has an inclination towards something unless we ask them? And in reality, at the end of the day, with all the succession plans that we put in place, having someone step up and assume a vacant role, you know, anticipates that that's the direction that they want to head. So don't be afraid to discuss interests with your top performing employees. It's a little self-serving because it allows you to verify that they are interested in, you know, being a successor for a certain role. But then on the flip side, it lets that employee know that you consider them to be a top performer and that you're trying to plan out something to keep them happy and growing at your organization. Okay, let's go ahead and talk for a moment about key positions. I mentioned earlier that this is, you know, kind of a beast of an effort to sort through and figure out what are your key positions. Because certainly you could make the argument that everyone at your company performs an essential task, otherwise you wouldn't have them. But it's just a little bit more than that. It's really the idea of anything that is business critical or next to impossible to replace, or people who hold together different divisions or units of your organization who would be left without leadership or guidance. It's also any position that has, you know, some sort of extremely skilled or extremely experienced person in there, and when they leave, they'll take that knowledge and experience with them. So those are just some of the characteristics. Formally defined, a key position has one or more of the following. They're essential to the organization's strategic plan. They provide leadership and guidance to an organization. They have a very specific knowledge set or training, which is hard to replicate or duplicate. They're able to do an essential task that is absolutely essential for the operation of the business. So they perform something that absolutely must happen in order for the business to work. And then not having a particular person in this role would have a significant impact on the business. So having a gap or a deficiency there would be impactful and noticeably so. So a few things to look at in terms of making this a little bit more of a modern approach to succession planning is to take into account any strategic initiatives that your organization is working towards. So a lot of organizations at the beginning of every year or every 2 years set some strategic initiatives or company-wide goals. And you want to make sure that anyone who is an integral part of that goal or initiative is identified as having a key position. So that's another thing that you should be thinking about that maybe you haven't considered in the past. All right, so now that we know what a key position is and some of its characteristics, let's talk about actually going through our organization and identifying them. First of all, you're probably not going to be able to do this on your own. So it is perfectly okay and actually expected almost that you'll solicit some feedback from managers or leaders within your organization, especially the managers, just because they're hands-on in the day-to-day operations of the business, and they may have some insight into key positions that we may not be aware of. So get input from your managers and executives. The second thing that you can do is consult the org chart. I know that seems silly, but if you're looking at an organizational chart and you notice a person or a position that has a lot of lines and nodes running towards them, they're probably an integral part of the organization because they either lead a large team or they bridge together 2 or more different units and kind of act as that funnel for all of those different businesses within each of those units. So don't forget to take a look at the org chart. That might give you a good place to start as well. I do, in the first bullet point, have some criteria listed for you. Some of them are the easy ones. They're the managers, people who have a lot of people rolling up to them. My second criteria or characteristic is a highly utilized member of the executive team. And notice for a moment that I qualified that. If you have an executive team with 8 people on it, you may have some executives that are more highly utilized than others. The COO, for example, may have multiple lines of business running up to her, but someone in another executive role may not have any unit of the business reporting to them. They may be in an advisory capacity or something like that, and then you may say to yourself, well, they handle, let's say, 15 to 20% of a certain function, whereas our COO is, fully utilized across the board. And so you may focus first your attentions onto that highly utilized person. Some tips to kind of bring your succession planning up to speed is look beyond those core leadership roles. I know I've said it a few times, but don't just focus on the top of the organization. There are people at all levels of your organization who are critical. And customers that I work with who say, we only plan for the top so many people, you're setting yourself up possibly for some key vacancies down the road because there will be people at every level who are key. Certainly the number may go down as you move down your org chart, but there will still be some that you want to make sure you're identifying. And my note at the bottom, many positions will have some sort of essentialness, but they're not all critical. You can't plan for all of them, although I've certainly seen some people try. So just look for the ones that are truly critical, that truly will cause an impact to business if there happens to be a vacancy. Okay, the mitigation of risk. This is a good one because this is something that we should all be thinking about now as we're trying to be a little bit more forward thinking. So we know that the workforce is changing. We know we got a lot of people retiring. We know we have some people job hopping more frequently than we would expect. We know that we can be doing some planning exercises to, help shore up our reserve of employees. So what are some things that might happen if we happen to run into a key position vacancy? And so some of the risks that you see here, You may come to a stop with business. That person who essentially pushed that button in your factory, who is no longer pushing that button, may cause a delay in delivering something or meeting a business obligation. If your vacancy occurs along the line of leadership or within a managerial spot, you may find yourself without a leader for a little while. That may mean that your organization lacks or is perceived to lack vision, and that can be detrimental to kind of the health of the company perception-wise, especially from an outside investor role, or if you're a publicly traded company, from an investor standpoint that way. It might also be a potential safety or security risk. So if you have persons who perform some sort of essential security or safety role, you may be setting yourself up for a deficiency there. And that very well may mean that you have an inability to meet some compliance requirements. And overall, it may mean that people are working twice as much in some areas to offset the vacancy, and that may lead to some unhappy people down the road. So those are just some of the risks of ending up with a vacant key position. And so how do we go about mitigating that risk? Well, obviously, doing our succession planning is a great way because it makes sure that we have people identified, being prepared to take over a role should it come up suddenly, and having multiple people in case we need to make multiple adjustments to accommodate. So things that you should be doing, not only your annual succession exercise, you need to be constantly evaluating that list of key positions to see what changes are there. So it could be that you're adding in key positions, but also you could be removing key positions. You want to have some way to identify your top performers and your high potential employees. And those are actually two different groups of people, although some employees could fall into both. Top performers are your people who perform well. They're at the top of your list. They're getting high feedback remarks. Time and time again, they're hitting whatever quota or minimum requirements and maybe exceeding it by a certain amount. And they stand out in people's minds when you think, who does a good job in a particular role or particular function. High potential employees are employees who have the potential to be top performers or who have the potential to be excellent leaders. They may be new to your organization, or they may be new to the workforce in general, and maybe they're not as tried and tested as some of our known top performers, but there is someone who has seen in them the possibility that they could go on to do great things. And you can identify these people by getting input from your managers, as well as by using performance management evaluations. Looking at people's scores there will give you a good idea of who your top performers are. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we are utilizing development and training plans to get people up to speed where needed. And this is always an area where I find many organizations kind of not drop the ball, but they're not prepared to go that next step. So they've gone through the trouble of identifying their key positions. They've gone through the trouble of identifying their top performers and aligning them together. But then when there's not a direct match, where there is some sort of competency gap or deficiency, they're not taking that next step to get people shored up and ready for that particular role. So you may have someone who's 65 or 70% ready to take on that vacancy. And if you just leave them where they are without any development or training, they may or may not ever get any higher than 70%. But if you're working with them on development plans and providing them with additional training, maybe some shadowing opportunities or knowledge transfer sessions, then by the time that vacancy does become available, that person is more than 70% prepared to take over that particular role. And of course, this has the added benefit of keeping those job hoppers at your organization a little bit longer. because now they see that their next big step or their next big hop is actually in your organization and not outside of your organization. And of course, things like technology can help you with this process and can help you mitigate the risks of having a vacant position. So there are software pieces out there that do perform or help you perform your succession planning process. They will keep track of your plans for you. They will make recommendations. You can store all of those requirements for your key positions right in the system, as well as a roster of your employees and whatever competencies or qualifications they have, and the system will go in and do little matchups for you. With the system, you're able to work with a larger set of data because you're not manually crunching through things. And that means that when you're looking for successors, you may throw in those people from your, recruiting talent pool. You may throw in, previous employees who are no longer with you but who left on good terms. You may throw in more people that you're not planning with right now because the system can do all of that number crunching for you. Another nice thing about using technology to help you with this process is that they can also do a little bit of predictive work. So they can predict for you possible upcoming retirements. They can predict for you, those high-performing employees. They can let you know if there's a shortage of some particular skill set, as people are coming and going. So you're just able to do a whole lot more and to be a whole lot more proactive, I guess is the word, when it comes to succession planning if you're using technology. And if you happen to be using a piece of technology that's part of your core HCM system, then that core HR data is keeping your succession plan up to date. Because as someone terminates your organization or, a new position is added for a new hire, then these particular changes can be reflected in your succession plan. If you're doing your succession plan, on a whiteboard or a Word doc, and it's 6 months old and 3 of the people on there has terminated, then you're still left with those 3 particular deficiencies. And if it's all tied together, then the system is identifying that for you. Okay, I do have a few screenshots of some succession planning software for those of you who maybe haven't seen it or haven't had any exposure to succession planning software. There are a few different products out there that do a really nice job, especially when it comes to putting together visuals like you see here. And so here I have the VP of Sales that's been identified as a key position. Right now it's being held by a lady named Carla. She has 2 successors, Marcus and Wilma. And you can see that they're ranked. Marcus is ready now, so he's in green. Wilma is not quite ready. She's 1 to 2 years out, and so she's in yellow. And I mentioned don't just do your planning at one level, drop down and do a level below that. So you can see, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, Wilma, her position right now is as Sales Director of Northwest Sales. Her position has 2 successors identified as well. So multiple levels of succession planning. And if you can use a tool or a piece of technology that can help you visualize, it's very easy to see where your holes and deficiencies are. And this is just another view. I took a snapshot for you of what we call a lineage chart. So you can kind of track down, again with Carla having the key position, Marcus and Wilma below that as potential successors, and then listing out the successors for Marcus and Wilma's role. And if we traversed all the way down the organization, we could start to see where different holes were. So when looking at this scenario, I can see if Carla were to leave, Marcus and Wilma are my 2 most likely candidates. But if I move Marcus, His two successors are both in red. They're not ready. They're 3 to 5 years out. Whereas if I moved Wilma, Larry in green could easily move up into her role. So it goes back to that phrase, don't fill one gap just to create another. You need to make sure that you're planning downstream as well. Two other views that I have here for you. One is a close-up of the key positions. So we can see Sales Director of the Southwest, currently held by Vic Stokes. He's got two little icons next to his name to let us know that he is a high performer and also at high risk of loss, potentially because he's being underutilized. And then successors for his role, Steve and Judy, one ready now and one ready in 1 to 2 years. And then I've got the successor profile open. I opened up Judy's profile. I can see that she's been in her current role for 7.5 years, and she's actually nominated as a successor for 3 different positions. So Director of Sales Operations, Director of Southwest, and then Director of the Northeast. And for 2 of them, she's 1 to 2 years ready, and for that third one, she's 3 to 5 years out. And so because she's put in as a potential successor in 3 different areas, and she's about 1 to 3 years out for all of them, she would be a great person to develop a plan for, a training plan or a development plan, because she has so many different areas where she could be a great successor if we just bridge those gaps in some of those little deficiency areas. Okay, that brings us to question 3. Hester, are you with us? Are you able to open up the poll for question number 3?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay, poll question number 3. Are you using succession planning software for your planning needs? So Hester will open up our poll. Go ahead and just take a moment or two and indicate your feedback or your results, and then we'll share them with your group.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the poll results for are you using succession planning software for your planning needs is 12% yes and 88% no.
Okay, thanks, Hester. Those are not bad numbers. We've got some who do and some who don't, and that's perfectly okay. I do have our last poll question back to back, actually, and that was, is the software actually meeting your needs? And I'm actually going to go ahead and open this poll. I know most of you are not using software, but for those of you who are, is it meeting your needs? And that may give those of you who aren't some sort of indication whether the software is useful or not. So Hester, would you go ahead and start poll 4 for us, please?
And the poll is open now, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the poll results for is said software actually meeting your planning needs is 25% yes and 75% no.
Okay, thank you, Hester. And thank you, everyone, for your input. So about 1/4 said it was meeting needs, about 3/4 says it's not. So just food for thought for all of you out there who aren't yet using software. Maybe look for a succession-specific tool, or see what you can continue doing with what you currently have. Okay, working with millennials. This is our last big section, and this actually happens to be one of my favorites. I don't know if I identify to be a millennial or not, but I'm right on that cusp where I could technically say I am, or I could technically say I'm a Generation Up. We'll see. But some news for you. Deloitte did a millennial survey back in 2016, and the results of two particular questions were as follows. 91% of millennials said that they aspire to be leaders. And that's pretty great. That's a pretty high number. So we have some excellent aspirations within this a segment of our workforce. On the flip side, of course, is that 66% said they expected to leave their current employer by 2020. So it's 2.5 to 3 years. All those people who want to be leaders are going to be leaving our organization and going somewhere else. So that just shows you that they have high aspirations, but they don't plan to stay where they are, at least not right now. I did a little bit of follow-up research on this, and one thing I did find is that once they make it to a leadership role, they are very likely to stay and be a very good leader in that role. So the challenge then is how can we get some of these aspirational people into leadership roles sooner? And I know that there's no way to kind of rush people through the process, but we do need to manage expectations, because along with that 91% who aspire to be leaders, they aspire to be leaders right away. I was really surprised to come across this particular graphic, but if you look at this, this is kind of the expected time level to transition in millennials' minds, from being entry level to being an executive level manager within 8.4 years. And I kind of chuckled to myself, because if you started working out of college in your early 20s, then by your early 30s you'll be running the whole company. And that just kind of goes back, I think, to some of the aspirations and goals that this generation has, which is wonderful. We just need to figure out a way to harness it, and to harness it at our company so that they stay working with us in-house instead of jumping somewhere else. Especially if we do start to invest in their development plans and growing and developing them, we want to keep them with us for sure. So now that millennials make up, I don't know if it's 31 or 33% of the workforce, but it's over 30%. You're going to start to see your succession plan incorporating individuals from this particular generation. And that's fabulous, except that we learned earlier that they tend to stay at a company for, on average, 3 years and 4 months. So your succession plan is going to have what we could possibly consider short-term employees in what we hope are key positions. So we need to take some action now to try to keep some of those, especially your top performing millennials, but millennials in general, at your organization. And here are some of the things that millennials are citing as being appealing in a job. First, engagement and connection with the company. Second, frequent one-on-one meetings. Third, opportunities for coaching and mentoring. That was a key ask that many millennials had. And then 4, a clearly defined career path. They want to know that if they stay with you, they have somewhere to go. And they don't want it to be just somewhere. They specifically want to know where they can go. And so for a succession tip to kind of update your current way of doing things, I have the recommendation to break roles into smaller steps, to kind of redo a little bit how you do career paths, and then don't wait too long between promotions. And I broke this out for us so that you can see what it looks like. And yes, this is an exaggeration of my concept, but I wanted to make it very clear to you that someone who right now moves from analyst to manager to director could be receiving little promotions along the way, so that they are not feeling stagnant at your organization and feel as though they're progressing, even though the timeline to get from analyst to director is the same in both scenarios. So you can see I've just broken out the career path and taken a little different view of it. And then people are getting, little promotions along the way and staying engaged in your organization. I am going to actually skip over poll number 5 and go right into our wrap-up. So to kind of summarize what we talked about today, succession planning is a process. It should be ongoing. It's okay to do kind of your big planning once a year, but make sure that those plans are being updated as jobs change and as people change. Make sure you're thinking about the vision of the organization as you go about doing your planning. If the vision is to lean towards one particular business area and away from another, you may want to focus more of your time on that new area. Key positions are not exclusively found at the top of the org chart. There will be key positions at all levels of your organization, so don't ignore ones towards the bottom. Proper succession planning and development planning will mitigate the risk of vacant key positions. If you're lining people up to take those vacancies and you're training them while they're waiting, then you've got people who are able to fill those vacancies should they occur. Utilizing technology is going to let you act faster in your succession planning instances and also to work with a larger pool of data. And then finally, millennials have the potential to be very excellent and loyal leaders. And so you want to make sure that you're taking steps at your organization to keep them at your organization. You want to be able to harness, their work ethics, and you want to be able to harness their aspirations, and you want to keep them happy so that they'll stay high-performing individuals within your organization. I think we are actually out of time for today. I apologize. We don't get to ask and answer questions, but if you are typing them into the question bar within the webinar software, I'll receive them and be sure to follow up with you. And with that, I will hand things back over to our host, Hester, who will conclude for today.
Thank you, Rebecca, for presenting this very informative webcast today. Just a few reminders for the attendees. If you would like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available for up to 7 days. All webcast credits are stored in your HR.com account. Watch for your HR.com email to arrive within 1 to 2 business days. It will contain your certification credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen once the webcast has ended. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.